Welcome back, Local Decision 2024. I'm Eric Nelson. Thanks for tuning us in. And joining us now, Alex Moe, Republican, Minnesota House District 32B candidate. That, of course, would be Blaine and Lexington. Alex, welcome to North Metro TV. And let's get out of the gate by having you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and why you're running.
Sure. So, like you said, my name's Alex Moe, running for 32B, Southeast Blaine and Lexington. A little bit of background, I guess, about me. I graduated from undergrad from the University of Minnesota Duluth. I graduated there with 6 majors and a minor. I then went to get a paralegal certificate online through Boston University. I kind of did that as a gap year. And then I am currently studying, doing my law degree at Mitchell-Hamline School of Law. So I do that in the evenings, and then during the day I work full-time for the Anoka County Court Administration.
All right, so what kind of experience do you have, Alex, that you feel has prepared you for this moment to enter politics?
So I have a lot of different experience. Despite being fairly young, I've worked in corrections, manufacturing, food industry, sales, kind of a little all over the place. I've had private industry jobs, union jobs, a lot of different experiences that I think really help me understand what your common working person wants and what they need. The majority of people tend to be somewhere in that middle working class area, and rather than just looking at studies and data saying what we think the middle class wants, I've lived in the middle class my whole life. I've worked alongside these people. I've talked with them. These are my friends, my neighbors, and my family. So I have a lot better idea, I think, of what they truly want than somebody who, has worked in nonprofits their whole life. My opponent, he went to a private school and has worked in nonprofits his whole life. I went to public school, K through 12. I was the student school board representative my senior and junior year of high school, so got to see the school board for a public school from that perspective. And then I've worked in union type jobs for a good majority, or private sector jobs for a good majority of my life. I have that actual experience doing the things that we have a lot of legislation we need to pass on.
All right, so in these polarized times, one thing we all agree on is that Minnesota State Highway 65 needs to be fixed, and major upgrades are coming. The funding is in place. Do you think a new and improved Highway 65 will be the panacea? Is that going to be enough, or do we need more infrastructure improvements in this area?
I think Highway 65 was definitely a big one. I think a lot of people have been having concerns about that. We'd seen traffic congestion issues. So I think it's a good step in the right direction. Obviously, we need to finish Highway 65. It's hard to do too many of those big projects at the same time just because of funding and because of needing the manpower to do it. And for example, if we started doing road construction on another big road, all of a sudden people can't go anywhere. You're just gridlocked. So I think first and foremost, we want to finish 65, make sure it goes off well, efficiently, in a timely manner. And then once that's done, we can start looking at other areas we can improve nearby, try to figure out, okay, where else can we improve in the Blaine area and across the state. But for me, the Blaine area is kind of where I'm putting my focus on. What other areas of concern are there for citizens? And that'll be a lot of talking to people. Hey, when you commute, what infrastructure areas do you see that need improvement? Is there areas that maybe need to be changed from a roundabout to a light, or a light to a roundabout, or a stop sign to something else? Is there areas that need to be improved in some way? And I think the biggest thing is talking to the citizens, because they're the ones actually using these roads. They're the ones who are seeing real time what's happening, rather than just getting anecdotal stories from random data sets. That can help us, guide us, but we need to be talking to the actual people.
And then 65, when it is finally fixed, that's going to change the look of Blaine, isn't it? I mean, in the sense we've got the USA Cup, we've got the 3M Open, and all these other events that happen here, and it'll be more seamless moving, north and south, east and west, won't it?
Yeah, and, the 3M Open, things like the National Sports Center, we have a lot of big events in Blaine. I mean, the 3M Open is the only PGA Tour we have in Minnesota, to my understanding. It's a very big event, and Blaine is, I think last I saw, 9th largest city in Minnesota, and continuing to grow. We're seeing these new housing projects, new developments constantly in the Blaine area, new businesses coming. We need to make sure that what we're doing, we're looking to the future, making sure we know that A good example of something I've seen is sometimes with schools, they'll build an extension because they're at capacity, and then within a year they're already at capacity again. So making sure we're really being mindful of what the future holds, what the projections are showing, and not just structuring the fix to bring it to where it should have been, but making sure it's actually looking forward to the future and planning. Blaine could become one of the big powerhouse cities in Minnesota, and we need to be looking towards that and how we can model any changes towards that.
Minnesota is one of just 10 states that taxes Social Security. Would you like to see that go away, or where do you land on that topic?
Yeah, I think that Social Security should not be taxed. Obviously, I don't think it should be taxed federally either, but that's not something I personally can affect. But if I was elected, I would actually not only make sure that nobody pays taxes on Social Security, at least for sure when they're retired, but any retirement benefits I personally think should not be taxed. People have their pensions and their special health savings plans meant for retirement, and I don't think these things should be taxed at all for anybody, regardless of income level. It doesn't make sense. We're trying to use, these systems are supposed to help people prepare for being retired, help them when they are no longer working, and when you have that fixed income, a tax increase can make a massive difference because it's not like you're getting paid more. It's not like all of a sudden when inflation goes up, your pay goes up as somebody who's retired. So we need to make sure we're really thinking about these people who are retired or on disability pay, that they have no means of increasing their income. We don't want to make them feel like they're forced to go back to work when they're 60, 70, 80 years old, feel like they have to go get a job just to make ends meet.
All right, at the time of this recording, we're just a day removed from a school shooting in Georgia, and school just got underway across the U.S. Minnesota has passed some gun laws, in the last year. Do you think more needs to be done? Because I know there are parents who, they drop their kids off or they see them get on a bus and they're wondering what might happen. Or even if you just go into the grocery store, the church, or the gym, whatever. Do you think we need to do more?
I think the biggest thing is we have laws on the books that just can't be enforced right now because we have such a lack of officers. I think that's one thing we can do is address our policing shortage. Right now in Minnesota, we're down 1,000 officers, which is 10% of our police force. That's a huge number. And in the next 2 to 4 years, there's another 1,000 to 1,800 officers who are set to potentially hit retirement or hit their pension age, and they could, and a lot of them probably will choose to leave. So then all of a sudden we're not down 1,000, we could be down 2,000 or 3,000 in the next 2 to 4 years. We can't have a police force that's that understaffed. For me working in the courts, and I have a brother who works for the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, we know about what's going on. We hear these things. Police in Minneapolis, they're being told that if there's not an active perpetrator at the crime scene, if somebody calls 911 saying somebody just robbed me, if the perpetrator's not still there, the police aren't going to respond until after the fact. Because they're just going to collect evidence after the fact and try to find them because they're too understaffed. They don't have the resources to actually help citizens in the moment and actually respond to crime. And this is very concerning, and when we see this crime at all these levels, of course it's going to spill over into the schools as well. And then another issue, obviously, a lot of people are blaming guns for the violence in the schools, but I think the more important thing to look at is mental health. Even if they had access to guns, if these people potentially had seen earlier intervention by a mental health specialist, a lot of these shootings probably could have been prevented. A lot of it boils down to family situations, whatever it might be, something's not going well in their life, and they feel the need to take this extreme measure in their minds. They're doing these terrible things because they feel like they have no other option. And if we had better mental health for our students to address issues of, somebody's being bullied, let's help them through it. Let's address the issue, let's stop the bullying. Somebody's having some mental health problems, but they're hiding them from their parents. Let's try to see if we can catch that before it becomes a real problem. Because, if you look back, and obviously I'm not this old, but talking to my parents, back when they were kids, people would come to school, especially my dad, he went to school in northern Minnesota. They'd have shotguns or rifles in a rack in their truck, and they'd go hunting after school. We didn't see school shootings then, and guns were literally in the parking lot. So why do we see mass shootings now? It's not because guns are more accessible. We've had more restrictions, background checks, more strict scrutiny on who's getting guns. It's more of a problem of mental health. And I think that's what we really need to address.
But we are, the U.S., the only civilized country that deals with this issue. I know I've talked to people in Canada. They say, well, we have to jump through more hoops to get a gun. Do you think that, especially people who might be mentally challenged, like you just brought up, that they should have to jump through more hoops and there are more background checks on people like that?
I mean, I think there's a certain limit to it because, you know, we could try adding more things, but the thing is, if you look at a lot of these mass shootings, very few of them did the person who did the shooting, were they the ones who owned the gun? Sometimes it's they got it from, they stole their parents' gun, which, you know, that does come down to parents needing to be more responsible with guns. I remember when I was younger, we took firearm safety, and it was made very clear your gun, if you're not using it actively, should be stored in a locked safe that your children don't know the combination to, and unloaded. These are things that are simple that everybody should be doing, but not everybody does. But a lot of these kids, you know, they're not even old enough to have purchased a gun, so of course they don't have a gun. So the problem becomes, we can make it harder, but the people who are purchasing the guns, they still would have been able to purchase that gun. So are we going to start expanding the survey to now you can't own a gun if even a single person, like they have to do a background check on every single person in your house, even somebody who shouldn't be having access to the gun? Or should we be addressing the underlying problem of why wasn't the gun securely stored? I think that becomes a little bit of a bigger issue for some of these places where why wasn't the gun properly stored?
In your opinion, what's going well now in the state of Minnesota?
If I'm being very honest, I think there's not a lot going well right now. I mean, we look at these last 2 years, for example, we had about a $17 billion surplus, and that's all gone. My opponent, Matt Norris, when he came on the League of Women Voters forum 2 years ago, said that he would, you know, spend a third, send a third back to Minnesotans, and keep a third for a rainy day fund. Well, that's not what he did at all. He spent every penny. There's no rainy day fund, and very little of it actually went back to Minnesotans. At one point, it was suggested maybe $1,000, $2,000 would go back to individual citizens, taxpayers, but almost nobody actually got money back, and those who did, maybe $200, $300, which doesn't really help when we're seeing record inflation levels. So that's just one example. Another example is the fraud we've seen in the last 2 to 4 years. We had 3 different instances, the Feeding Our Future, where millions of dollars in fraud were committed because companies were saying they were going to do something, and we had no actual audits or checks on these companies making sure they were doing what they said they were doing. We had the frontline workers pay where a bunch of money didn't even go to the actual frontline workers during the COVID crisis. And then we had the COVID unemployment fraud where there were people who were being paid thousands of dollars that didn't actually need the money or didn't deserve the money. This amounted to almost $1 billion, if not more than $1 billion of fraud. And this is just an oversight issue of where we're not actually holding our government accountable. These are programs that may have been good intentions, but then we're not actually following through and making sure this money is going to the right places. If we're going to do these programs, we need to do them right, because this is taxpayer money we're spending, and it's just gone. And a lot of this fraud money, as somebody who works for the courts and works a lot with restitution, I can tell you that most of this money will never be recovered. That's how a lot of this restitution goes, is that we are never going to see that money back, so we just blew about $1 billion of Minnesotan money. And that should concern every taxpayer. And these are just some of the examples. On top of just the lack of transparency, we had a 1,400-page omnibus bill passed in the last 45 minutes of the legislative session along party lines. When we see a candidate try to talk about unity, being a moderate, working with Democrats and Republicans like my opponent, he said all these things. He said he was going to be for unity, for working with Democrats and Republicans, and for being a moderate candidate, to then vote every single time with his party consistently. Like, I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, if you're going to say you're a moderate, you can't be voting party lines every single vote, because that's not moderate, especially not this past 2 years. And when it came to that 1,400-page omnibus bill, he voted with his party, with the exception of, I think, 3 times where he just didn't vote, but he voted for the final bill. And when that bill was voted for, there was no physical copies available for somebody to actually read, and there was no digital copies for somebody to read. So they were voting for a bill where a lot of them couldn't possibly have known every single detail in that bill. Where's the transparency? Where's the accountability for the Minnesotan voters? How am I as a citizen supposed to be able to tell my elected official, hey, I saw this bill was on the floor, don't vote for it, I don't agree with it, when there's 45 minutes between the bill being introduced and then being voted on. There's no opportunity for voters to have a say. There's no ability for anybody to read it and see what it says, and then it's just passed into law. So this is what the last 2 years have been. So I can't really say I've seen much any good happening. There might have been a few small things here and there, but they're just dwarfed by everything else that's happened.
So if you are elected to the House, what are your budget priorities going to be?
So I think the first thing would be looking at what we just did these last 2 years, because even though obviously Minnesota has to have a balanced budget to pass it, the projected budget, we have a projected budget with a deficit coming into the next cycle based off of all these new programs and things that we initially funded with money from that surplus. Well, that was a one-time thing, but we used it for recurring things that we're going to continue to be paying for. So now we have to figure out how we're going to address that. And that's another thing. This last year, on top of spending that whole surplus, we increased government spending by 40%, which is a ludicrous number to think of, 40% increase in government spending. And so obviously, if we have that kind of increase, we have to account for that somehow with raising taxes. That's just inevitably what's going to happen. They already increased taxes, I think it was about $90 billion. I can't remember what the number, or $90 million, I believe. There's already a large number of new taxes. And we're going to have to do even more if we were to keep with the current projected budget. And so that's why one of my first priorities is going to be seeing where we are overspending and trying to bring that back down, because I don't want to raise taxes on Minnesotans, especially not any more than they just had these last 2 years. Preferably, I'd like to cut taxes, but we have to see what we can do to cut taxes in a way that is somewhat responsible. We have this budget we have to manage. So first thing would be trying to get things out of the budget that don't need to be there, and then trying to reflect that in our taxes.
Minnesota has a new state flag. You want to go back to the old one. Can you tell us why?
So my biggest issue with the new state flag is that the way it was changed was just not representative of a democratic process. There was no actual vote on the House floor. If there was an actual vote on the House floor and representatives voted, yes, I want to change the flag, then maybe I could understand it, because there was some sort of democratic process. The people who are elected to represent us made a vote on it. But instead it was made by a partisan committee without any actual vote on the House floor, and then without a vote ever actually happening by the entirety of Congress or by the people, they changed the flag. Now, there's a lot of different reasons people are claiming that the flag was changed. I'm not going to get into those too much, but my biggest issue with that whole process is just the fact that you and me, your average citizens, had literally no say in it. It was presented in a committee outside of the actual session, and it was never voted on by the entirety of Congress and Senate, or the House and the Senate. Why was that change made? And when we're talking about all the money we have, that we are having all these extra taxes, it costs money to change all, because it was the state seal and the flag. It's going to cost a lot of money to replace all these flags, because anyone that's at a public site, somebody, whether it be the central state government or individual government entities, have to pay for these new flags. At the courthouse, all of our courtrooms have a flag. We have flags all over the place in our government buildings. Every single one's going to have to change now. And we're going to have to pay for that. And then what do we do with the old ones? Well, retire them, throw them away? I don't know. But we just wasted all this money for an issue that the people didn't even actually approve. Now, if the people would have approved it, I would have no issues with it. I would just accept it. I might disagree with it, but I could at least know we had a democratic process, we voted on it, we decided to change it. But this was an instance where there was, to me, it seemed an intentional skirting around of the normal democratic process, because they knew that most Americans, or I should say most Minnesotans, didn't favor changing the flag, because they were either indifferent about the current one or didn't want to change it.
And certainly you have a right to feel that way, but I've seen the new flag being displayed already. So if we went back to the old one, wouldn't that just waste more money? I mean, is the horse already out of the barn?
Yeah, and that's where it is tough for me, where I haven't fully decided what to do about that, because you're right, trying to change it back to the old flag, even if we had kept all the previous ones and could just put them back up, we would have already wasted some amount of money on the new ones. So honestly, that's something I would have to look at when I get elected and see and talk to the people and say, hey, this has already happened. Do we truly feel strongly enough to go back and waste the money that we would have to waste to go back? And so that's one of those where I think this is an issue where it would be very important to talk with my constituents and see once I get elected, okay, where are you on this issue? Is it something you still want to change back, or would you rather keep it the way it is just for the sake of money? So it's a tough issue, because now that it already happened, it's a lot easier to stop something from happening than to go and change things back after we already spent probably thousands and thousands of dollars to change it.
All right, before we let you go, why should the viewers out there vote for you?
So I think the reason viewers should vote for me is I'm a young person that is, when I say I'm going to be moderate, I think you can actually trust that I will be moderate. A lot of people who have been in politics for a while or around politics in a while, I feel they're stuck in their ways. They tend to just vote party lines no matter what happens, but that's not the way I feel in the grand scheme. Yes, I might be affiliated with a party, but ultimately it's you, the voters, who are actually electing me. So if I'm talking with my constituents, the people who elect me, and they say, this is what we want to happen. Let's say there's a tax policy, and they say, yes, we want you to pass this. Even if it's not how my party would want me to vote, if it's genuinely how my constituents feel, I'm going to vote the way my constituents want me to, because that is ultimately what we should be doing. I don't want to be a politician. I want to be a public servant. And I've said it before, I'm not in this to have some career in politics, to be in politics for 20, 30, 40 years. Honestly, I only would plan on doing 2 or 3 terms at the most, and that's only assuming I get elected to each of those terms, and there seems to be a good amount of support for me doing this job. And then I plan on just leaving politics, because I'm mainly doing this because I've seen what's happened these last 2 years, and what it came down to for me is, at what point do you stop complaining about what you see going on around you and actually do something yourself? Because like a lot of people, I've been complaining, saying, why are we spending money like this? Why are we wasting money? Why are we increasing taxes? Why are we doing this, that, or the other thing? And at some point I had to just decide, should I stop complaining and just start doing something, because it's getting out of hand and nobody was stepping up. And I decided, I think it's time for somebody to step up, and I feel like I have that moral and character that I'm not going to let myself be influenced by partisan politics, special interest groups. I'm not going to let myself be paid off by some lobbyist or company. I'm going to do what the actual people want me to do, because for me, that's what's most important. Politics it's gotten too political, it's gotten too polarizing right now, where we have extreme right, extreme left, and most voters, most Americans, most Minnesotans, they're somewhere in the middle. They're either just moderately left, moderately right, or maybe even just right in the middle. That's where most voters are sitting, and they just want us to vote for what's actually best for the country and what's best for Minnesota. So I think that's why I would be the best person to represent Blaine and Lexington, because I'm actually going to listen to the voters, and when I say I'm going to work with both sides, I'm actually going to work with both sides, because I know how important it is. And the reason you can also trust that is that regardless of the results of this election, we're going to have a Democratic governor. So it's going to be impossible for legislation to be passed without some amount of bipartisanship. We're going to have a Democrat governor, and unless the Republicans win the special election for the Senate, we're going to have a Democrat Senate. So that means I just by default have to work with the other party. When we have single party rule, things just get out of hand, because they know there's no check. They can pass whatever they want, and it's just going to go right up the ladder on a party line vote. And that's why I'm asking for you to vote for Alex Moe in November.
Alex, thanks for stopping by.
I appreciate your time.
All right. Alex Moe, Republican, Minnesota House District 32B. That would be Blaine and Lexington. This is Local Decision 2024.